Good morning, everyone. Good morning. In class here with us on a rainy day, or to all of our friends who are watching from home. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kit Leggett, and I am a member of the Social Sciences Committee. And I get to work with wonderful people like Dr. Fred Johnson in coming up with course ideas for you. And there must be some pretty good ones that we're doing, because look at all the people that are here and at home. Well, our director has asked me to read some announcements to you today, so here we are. First and foremost, welcome again. We're happy to have you here. For those in the room, please take just a moment to silence your cell phone, please. Ensure that they are silent so as not to distract from our presentation today. Also, welcome to the large crowd out there. We mentioned this joining us by Zoom in the virtual HASP room, and a special thank you to the gentleman in the corner back there. He's our volunteer and he's our course technician, David Blatt, right there. If you have joined the HASP virtual classroom as a participant, you will have the skills necessary to serve as a course technician. And you won't be alone. You'll be teamed up with an experienced course technician to learn the simple responsibilities of this important position. And so if you're interested, please contact HASP for more information, and that's hasp@hope.edu. Are you receiving the weekly HASP happenings emails? These colorful and picture-filled emails, if you've seen them, you will attest to this, are shared every Sunday morning. Who gets up on Sunday morning and sends these things? And they provide updates on the coming week's courses, special events, Hope College programs, and service opportunities, as well as important registration links. So make your HASP experience easy and find out what's happening. Visit the front desk today after class if you're not already receiving this communication. Next, as we approach a new month, we are happy to invite you to our monthly program, hosted this coming Tuesday, that's November the 1st at 9:30 a.m. at the Jack Miller Center for Musical Arts. The presentation is titled, "Why We Need President Ford Today." And that will be presented by Gleaves Whitney, who is the executive director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. And here's the kicker. Coffee and cookies will be served beginning at 9 a.m. So three good reasons to be there. The wonderful presentation, the coffees and cookies. And bring a friend. We hope to see you there. One last reminder. Please hold your comments and your questions until David or I can approach you. The microphone. This ensures our virtual learners and those connected with our in-class loop system can actively hear and participate in the conversation. Thank you. Well, and welcome you back to our second final session on critical race theory. We've learned a lot last week, and I know you're ready to learn even more today. We are in a time when there is a lot of dissension on many levels, and our guest speaker, Dr. Johnson, can certainly attest to the fact that there is so much going on with critical race theory that we should know about. Whether we agree with it or not, we should know about it. So here he is, our professor of history for over 22 years. And if you haven't heard me say this before, this gentleman has been teaching the American Civil War to gentlemen who are incarcerated at Muskegon Correctional Facility, and that's on every Friday. And it just takes a little bit of your time to get that ready.
About 3 hours a day.
Yeah, 3 hours a day. So I just think we should once again welcome Dr. Fred Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ken. Good morning to you all HAS scholars. I'll tell you the truth, why we need Gerald Ford now. Tell you the truth, right now, I take Nixon again. You know, that seems sane by comparison. But thank you all for giving me a reason to come over here, because I was been grading midterm exams. And just as I was about to contemplate going out to lay down on railroad tracks, I went, oh yes, HAS presentation. Let's get on with our part 2 of this, critical race theory, theorists, alarmists, mob American history, or what I've been calling a lynching American history. I'll be honest with you, I normally use a variety, like to use historians, scholars like to use a variety of different sources to put something together, whether you're writing a paper, doing a presentation, because a variety of sources is good for critical thinking, to make sure that you're getting it from a bunch of different viewpoints. But I relied heavily for this section upon a New Yorker article that had a lot of the elements that I think will be useful to us. And the article is entitled "How Conservative Activists Invented the Conflict Over Critical Race Theory." Now, I'll be honest with you, when I first saw this and I saw the word invented, I went, wow, that kind of falls into the category of what I've been suspecting about this all along. How does someone take a theory, and it is a theory, and essentially turn it into a weapon or weaponize it? Enter Christopher Rufo. Christopher Rufo was the son of Italian immigrants. The more I get into the story, I couldn't again help but just marvel at the ironies of life and the ironies of history, that a guy who is himself the son of immigrants is the force behind this thing, which ends up attacking immigrants, among other people. He had a job, his career up to this point, in his 20s and into his early 30s, had been that of a filmmaker, he was in communications, but in 2015, he began working on a film project for PBS to chronicle the experience of poverty in 3 US cities across the United States. And in the process of doing the research for that and putting that documentary together, he began to have a sea change of his own politics. He began to believe that poverty could not be alleviated through any kind of public policy. In other words, there's nothing government can do to ultimately solve poverty. That poverty was more the result of legacy issues having to do more with factors connected to social, family, or even psychological causalities. So there's nothing systemic, nothing governmental that had either caused it or could be done to alleviate it from either end. So essentially, it has to do with the society in which you live, your family situation, or you personally. It all kind of adds up to your fault. Well, from what we saw the last time, what we covered the last time, this clearly goes against what Derek Bell came to believe in his own experiences in presenting those court cases down in Mississippi. And after decades, after those court cases had ended up with Brown v. Board of Education, and Derek Bell is looking at it across the landscape of America, they've gone through the system. He's looked at it from the outside, and he has seen that they've done everything, they checked all the boxes they're supposed to. They went to the law, they used the law, they went to the Constitution, they believed in the system gave them victories, and yet nothing changed. And Derek Bell, understandably, we asked the question, well, we had done what we were supposed to do, we did our due diligence, we did our research, we went to the court, it was tried, judges weighed in on it, juries weighed on it, went to the Supreme Court, for God's sake, and it was serious, yet still here we are. Is there something else at work here? Derek Bell began to wonder. Beyond personal responsibility, which of course is always something you must consider, or family legacy, which is also legitimate to consider, or psychology, if you want to go ahead and take the third one, or is there something larger on a macro sense? And Derek Bell, from his vantage point, began to wonder and came up with the conclusion that it is a system, it is systemic wide. It will be like trying to separate wet from water, the heat from the flame, gravity from earth. It's just, if you have the one, the other one's just going to be there as a matter a fact. And yet there's this other viewpoint that says, actually, no, it is not anything that is systemically there. And if it is, you can't finagle it by any kind of policy changes. So what do? What's the question? And then, of course, in the midst of all this, there came the pandemic. Now, I don't know about you all, but during the pandemic, I found myself getting rather grumpy a lot. I wanted to, on some occasions, kick the pandemic's butt. There were other days I wanted to just, you'll have no idea how long it took me to find that thing on the internet. But the combination of the pandemic with its accompanying fear and ignorance. And when you all get time, when you get time, I think it would be a good intellectual exercise for all of us to look at what's gone on for the last 2 years and compare that to what happened in 1918. Aside from the time period and the specifics of, who's alive and the technology, human reactions to the pandemic and the Spanish flu of 1918, we're not much better than the people in 1918. We really have not advanced all that much as far as the human response to a global pandemic. And that is both interesting and tragically sad. But the pandemic, which is going to bring a lot of uncertainty and real death anyway, plus the combination of fear and ignorance, plus some good old American hate. The pandemic produced some things where people began referring to it as the China virus. And to be more specific, different leaders began referring to it, in my estimation, irresponsibly, as the China virus. Now, in 2019, when this thing broke out, I happened to be fortunate enough to be in Hong Kong, attending the second of 2 global health conferences that I attended that year. The first one had been in Ecuador, where as part of that, I spent a week in the Amazonian rainforest. And the people down there in Ecuador for the first half of the conference, they were wondering, why are you an historian down here at a health conference? We can understand epidemiologists and biologists and chemists and so forth, but what are you doing here? Very condescending. What are you doing here? I said, well, let me tell you what I'm doing here. What I'm doing here is you can have the best healthcare system in the world with all the best technology and the finest trained doctors. But what good is it if you can't get it to the people who need it? Things like war, famine, government corruption. So that's what I deal with. They say, yes, so you're the war corrupt guy. So, well, I wouldn't have put it like that, but okay. So healthcare needs a delivery system and policies that go along with it to make it viable for the people that need the healthcare. There's one other thing that happened during the pandemic, in addition to the fear, the ignorance, and the hatred. You needed people to believe the wild stuff that was going on. I call it the Ghostbuster Syndrome. If you saw the movie Ghostbusters, you know what? Okay, here it is. Saw the movie Ghostbusters back in 1984. There's one part of the movie, of course, it's all fiction, it's obviously fiction, but the Ghostbusters in the movie, they run a commercial. So let's go over here.
Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night?
Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic?
Have you or any of your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost?
If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up your phone and call the professionals. Go Ghostbusters! Our courteous and efficient staff is on call 24 hours a day to serve all your supernatural elimination needs.
We're ready to believe you!
And that is the point. People who are hearing things about the China virus, there was a cadre of people out there, and lots of them, who were ready to believe it the moment they heard it. Not the second time, not the third time, but I mean the first time. People who are already predisposed to blame some other person, some other thing, something beyond, to blame somebody for the misery that would have befallen the United States. They were ready to believe you. You know what? It's no less ridiculous than 3 guys pretending to, hunt down ghosts who are advertising. In fact, the guys hunting down ghosts may be a little bit more sane.
Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night?
All right. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. So the results of all the rhetoric about China virus and so on, of course, it translated into, well, all right, it translated into assaults and attacks on Asian Americans. The random assaults on people walking down the street in Chicago, for example, I think or New York City, was one woman who was just coming out of a store and got attacked by some random guy on the street, nearly stomped to death. And this woman saying, I am not a virus. In the meantime, while all this is going on, people began working from home remotely. And while they were doing this, what happened was that, with the New Yorker article put it like this: people were working it from home remotely, obviously, and they were still required to go to do their jobs and go through training. So in Seattle, Washington, this is a map of Washington State, and in Seattle, there was a city employee in Seattle who was required to go through mandatory sensitivity training or racial anti-bias training. And there was something going on in that training that they felt was a little bit off-key, off-center, awry. And so what they did was they leaked this information to Christopher Rufo. Now, the way the article points it out is that, before, in a classroom like this, in a work environment, if you had something to say, of course, that kind of information would be proprietary, confidential. You couldn't just take out documents from the company or leak it anywhere. So you wouldn't be able to just send it any place. But at home, on your Zoom account, suddenly it's a lot more difficult to control the information. You can record it with your cell phone or your wife's cell phone, your husband's cell phone, or somebody else's cell phone, take a picture of it, record it, and then forward it in an email. So controlling what's going on in the training session became more difficult. Now, they forwarded this information to this guy, Christopher Rufo, who then started looking into it independently and found more information. The person that forwarded him the information did not like what they were hearing, this anti-bias training. They sent it to him. To his credit, he did some research and found some other things that were very suspect about it, at least deserving to be questioned. And what he found in his search came across two names. Now, that's Derek Bell on the right, and another woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. These are the two people who are most identified from their writings in the 1990s. There are a lot of people who are writing about this in the 1990s, but these two stand out as probably the two most prominent voices at the time. And Kimberly Crenshaw by herself now, since Dr. Bell is no longer among the living. But the two of them, and they also mention the guy, some of you have probably heard or read the book by Ibram X. Kendi, How to Not Be a Racist. And of course, what's the other one by Robin DiAngelo about white fragility. And there's a bunch of other books out there too. But these two were the two that coined or shaped the structure for what became known as critical race theory. Now, Kimberly Crenshaw is recorded as saying the following: the problem of race and racial disparities was not simply a matter of prejudice, but a matter of structured disadvantages that stretched across American society. Now, that is 180 degrees opposite from whatever's going on when it comes to poverty and homelessness is a matter of psychological, familial, or social consequences or circumstances or variables. And what it does is, from the one point of view, Christopher Rufo's is, it's not guaranteed it's going to be there. It can be there or not be there from person to person to person, depending upon your mindset, your family, your circumstances, the society that you live in. Whereas from the other mindset, it's baked in. It may not befall you, but it's going to be there. And just because you're not being affected by it, obviously, doesn't mean you're not being affected by it. So who's got the right perspective? More and more people started sending Christopher Rufo their information about similar training going on in their organizations. And to his credit, he continued to look into things. And then he had this idea. He saw in the language of what he was finding out, there was an opportunity. An opportunity. His thinking on this whole business about, is it societal? Is it personal? Is it something left or right? Is it center? Whatever it is, he had a bright idea and an opportunity presented itself to him. And he said that the people who have been fighting the culture war have been on the roads, have been on the defensive since the late Obama years. That would be from what, 2012, 2016. Now, 2016 was a transitional year for a lot of people. So the opponents of what people saw and associated with Barack Obama, they needed new language. The term political correctness had been overused and was passé. And the new politics of race had become transcendent. You needed something, the old racial politics had been tried and had gone the wayside with the 1960s. Cancel culture, although still a problem, and wokeness, still trying to figure out what that is, but wokeness being a problem, but it didn't have the kind of punch or material results that people really needed. Being woke was useful, but it had a limited application, and again, limited impact. Critical race theory proved itself to be the perfect villain as a weapon, as something to weaponize people's angst and their resentment or their concerns. And here, and doing the research on this to me is the part that was brilliant, because he tied it back to having either communist origins, as Karl Marx right there, communist origins, or being supportive of communist movements dating back to the 1960s. In the 1960s, people remember that as radicals, hippies, anti-war movement, communist threats, still the Cold War's going on. And I don't know, maybe you all have seen something different, but in my lifetime, whenever all you have to do is just label somebody with the word communist, and you're guaranteed to make progress, because people love to hate communism, and they should. I say it often. I make sure in my classes that I tell my students, let us get one thing straight. Communism is a failed system. Why do we know that? Because everywhere it's been applied, it's been at the point of a gun. So even where it appears to be working, as in China, it's still a one-man rule, Xi Jinping, totalitarian system, and everywhere where it's been applied, Stalin's Russia or Lenin's Russia, Chavez's Venezuela, Castro's Cuba, Kim Jong-un's North Korea, wherever it's been, people have not done it voluntarily. Only people who have wanted it are the ones who stage a revolution to oppose it on other people. That's not democratic. So it is to be avoided. And it is to be rightfully feared for what it can do and what it has done to people. It's left a terrible, bloody track record around the world. So we can get that straight. However, it's looked into this more and more and more, and they found more and more of an association with communism in the 1960s. Tracing it back, and there are people like Angela Davis and others associated with socialist elements. I think it's worthwhile for us to remember. You remember one time, people revere his name now, and everybody stops on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday to talk about how much of a great man he was. But you remember there were days he was labeled a communist. He was investigated by the FBI. He too was at one time called a communist and on Hoover's wanted list and want to be watched. And just for edification, there's a man named Christopher Browning who wrote a book entitled Ordinary Men. It's Ordinary Men, and it follows it's essentially a unit biography or a unit expose or a unit study of Police Battalion 101. Now, Police Battalion 101 was part of the Einsatzgruppen, which was a part of the Schutzstaffel, the Waffen SS, which is part of the Wehrmacht, not really part of the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht was the regular German army, the legitimate German army, but the Schutzstaffel, these were the killing squads. These are the people who were the true believers. These were the ideologues. In the Einsatzgruppen, these are the guys, usually if you're in your prime to be a soldier, an infantryman, you're between the ages of 18 to 25, possibly 35. So these guys are 35 and older, so they're not as old as they're going to get, not as young as they're going to be, still useful. So they're not going to be on the front line. So what was their job? These were the cooks, bakers, candlestick makers. They put a gun in their hands and told them, your job is to go around and slaughter Jewish men, women, and children. Why? Because they're Jews. Is that it? Yeah, that's it. Every day? Yes, every day. Where? Wherever you find them. That's their job. And interestingly enough, in Christopher Browning's book, as he gets to the end, he says that studies after World War II showed that, among others, they took different ideologies and looked at why communists would have been so antithetical to the ideology of the fascists, because communism, and let me put a fine point on this, communism asserts, it promises that it's going to treat everyone with equality. Now, that's not what actually happens, but it says so. That's a selling point. That's the attraction. So anytime in America, you're asking for equal treatment and equality, and for barriers to be broken down, you automatically are equated with a communist, wanting everybody on the same plane. When all you might really want is just regular, good old first-class citizenship. But if you take and spin that, for a population that, like the Ghostbusters, already wants to believe something, guess what? It's a real short step. So Christopher Rufo found out, he said, you know what? The best part about what these guys have done, the critical race theorists, the best thing that the critical race theorists have done is that the connotations are all negative to that critical race theory. Its connotations are all negative to most middle-class Americans, including racial minorities who see the world as creative rather than critical, individual rather than racial, practical rather than theoretical. Strung together, the phrase critical race theory connotes hostile, academic, divisive, race-obsessed, poisonous, elitist, anti-American. Most perfect of all, critical race theory is not an externally applied pejorative. CRT was the label that the critical race theories chose themselves, essentially shot themselves in the foot, fell on their sword, choose whatever metaphor you need, but they did it to themselves. Let's just go ahead and take the thing they invented and turn it back on them. But before we do that, let's take a look at what he says here. Because if in fact they're wrong, and it's negative to most middle-class Americans, including racial minorities, most Americans who see the world as being one where your individual actions account for your individual success or failure. And there's too much of an emphasis on race in a society where race doesn't matter anymore. And people who do practical things and live in a practical world where, you go to work, you get paid, you pay your bills. If you do the right thing, check all the right boxes, put your shoulder to the wheel, keep your nose clean, obey the law, everything will turn out right. Yeah, that's true. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way we've been told it's going to work. But then the critical race theorists will tell you, well, yeah, that's true for a segment of the population. But can you say that's going to happen to everybody? And then if it's not going to happen to everybody, are there some other causal factors there that have nothing to do with individuality, or individuality based on where you're born, who you're born to, and what you look like as you grow up in that world? Could it be that too? Because if it's that, then there may be something larger beyond yourself that's also impacting you. Could it be both and not just one or the other? Well, the opponents of CRT took this as it became weaponized, and that's how the theory became a weapon. And eventually began to have consequences and implications for history, I believe. Let me give you an example. In the aftermath of the Civil War, Edward Pollard, who had been an editor of the Richmond Examiner, he wrote a book entitled, well, The Lost Cause. And then there was an American historian, pretty good historian actually, by the way, William Archibald Dunning, taught at Columbia University. Now, consider this. Here's an American school-trained historian, very good at what he does, very articulate, at teaching at Columbia, flagship school. And he too believed in this thing called the lost cause. What was the lost cause? I'm glad you asked. The lost cause was the South won the Civil War fair and square on the battlefield. You lost, look, the South, as my predecessor, Dr. Cohen, my mentor when I first got here, Bill Cohen told me that, he said that the South was about as defeated a nation as any nation could ever have been. Like Germany after World War II, Japan after World War II, it was defeated. So refugees, economic collapse, the usual things with disease and hunger and so on, it's a defeated society. But somehow, as the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Southerners began constructing for themselves an alternate narrative that never occurred. That yes, we lost on the battlefield, but look what we were fighting for. We were fighting for our way of life. There's nothing wrong with fighting for your way of life, is it? Well, no. We were fighting for our families. You like family, don't you? Yes, I like my family. Well, most of the time. We're fighting for our principles and our values. In other words, we're fighting for values, principles, family, good American stand-up values and so forth. So yes, the war was lost. But the thing that we were fighting for some noble virtues, because from the very beginning of the Civil War, from the time that South Carolina submitted its secession ordinances in December 1860, they go through all the flowery language, and most of the seceding states do this. They go through all the flowery language, like back in 1775 or 1776, when our forefathers did blah, blah, blah with Great Britain, and they could no longer stand British tyranny and rule and so forth, because Britain had passed the Stamp Act, then the Quartering Act, and Americans, patriots, wanted to have freedom from a monarchical king grown too expansive in his power. So we are simply following that same tradition where government has overextended itself, and we now are going to do the same thing. And oh yeah, by the way, you can't tell us we can't own slaves. Sooner or later, after they get through all the fluff and fume about the founding fathers and the virtues of democracy and John Locke's and consent of the governed, they get down to the nitty gritty, the brass tacks of, and you can't tell us what to do with our property. Every secession ordinance I've ever read, sooner or later, sometimes it's sooner than later, gets down to it. And just in case there's any doubt about it, Andrew Johnson, Brother Alexander A. Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy in March 1861, gives a very lengthy speech called the Cornerstone speech. You know, a cornerstone, that part of the building that without it, it falls down. He essentially says, our new government is the first one in the history of mankind, certainly on this continent, to put the Negro in his proper place, that the Negro is inferior to the white man. And he says he's inferior spiritually, naturally, biologically, constitutionally. He covers all the bases, just in case you are confused about where we're coming from. He said that in 1861, then 4 years later, an inaugural address, second one, March 4th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln, as he gets through the introduction, he says, we all knew the war was coming. And at the start of the war, a good number of colored slaves were located in the southern part of this union. Those colored slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. Then he goes on to say, and it's interesting that this President Lincoln, with the command of the language that he had and the brilliant intelligence that he possessed, that he said, everyone knew that somehow this peculiar interest was the cause of the war. However it started, somehow, we all knew. All who were there on April 12th, 1861, when Confederate batteries opened fire on Fort Sumter, all knew that somehow, and I may not even be able to tell you how, but somehow those 3.5 to 4 million enslaved persons were the cause of this conflict. Because you see, by 1865, Abraham Lincoln doesn't have room to play around anymore. He's got blood on his hands up to his shoulders. He's a man burdened with the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. So how do you get from there to after the war that's been lost by those who wanted to own human beings to say, well, we were fighting for a good cause? How do you do that? That in itself is a statement of power. When you can take a fact and reinterrogate it and just create a different story, people go, yeah, we'll take that one over there. Well, that's what Edward Pollard did. And then William Archibald Dunning taught a generation of historians that the lost cause actually was a legitimate line of historical thinking, and it went into the 20th century until finally you end up, by the time you get into the middle of the 20th century, with people in the South talking about, well, in fact, you know, if you're going out South at some point, you might even be struck that people didn't lose the war, that they won the war. Confederate flags flying everywhere. And then all of a sudden, by the time you get to the middle 20th century, the latter 20th century, it wasn't about slavery. In fact, you're not even mentioning it. We're just finding this thing, look, it's about heritage, not hate, just the updated form, an alternate history. Now, it's not going to be until, I mentioned to you all the last time that American Negro Slavery was a book written, which essentially cast a very benevolent kind of view on by Ulrich Bonnell Phillips, a scholar coming out of the University of Georgia, I believe. And he cast a very benevolent view of slavery. Yes, it was annoying occasionally, but look, they were happy, singing out there they were singing all the time. They couldn't have been mad. They picked all that cotton, and yeah, we gave them some. Look, think about how the poor people who were free, they had to find someplace to live. They had to be worried about their food, their clothing, the usual stuff for free people. We did all that for them. How bad could it have been? Well, then along comes 1957, Kenneth M. Stan writes a book entitled Reconstruction. Kenneth M. Stan, his book entitled The Peculiar Institution, where Kenneth M. Stan, in the middle of the 20th century, now it's 1957, and the thing about historiography is this. Oftentimes, the history that you get in a certain period will be dependent upon what's going on during that period. In 1957, two things had already happened. One, Emmett Till's murder. His mother took care to make sure people knew about that. There was already a sea change occurring. In 1956, the Montgomery bus boycott. Then in 1957, the Little Rock Nine, where the Army has to escort, 9 Black children to Little Rock Central High School. So in that same year, 1957, Kenneth M. Stan comes out with this book, The Peculiar Institution, which completely blows up Ulrich B. Phillips' benevolent approach to American slavery. And Kenneth M. Stan says, no, this was as bad as we said it was. Actually, it's worse than what you've been told. Now, W.B. Du Bois, another historian who worked on this with Black Reconstruction. Du Bois was a sociologist, historian, editor for the Crisis newspaper, which was the journalistic arm of the NAACP. So more and more, then the heavyweight, John Hope Franklin, comes out. John Hope Franklin, African-American historian who before his death will be known as the dean of Black historians in this country. And he simply just comes at it and says, this thing called slavery was not as bad as we said it was. It was worse than we said it was. In other words, there's no way to qualify or quantify the amount of human destruction that this system visited upon people for 250 some odd years by Abraham Lincoln's count on March 4th, 1865. But the other alternate history about the lost cause is still hanging out there. John Adams, the second president of the United States of America, said, in fact, people like to say, they quote him saying, facts are stubborn things. The entire quote is, facts are stubborn things. And whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Now, that's the way it should be. I agree with the president. John Adams said this in the aftermath of him defending British soldiers who had been accused of firing to the American crowd, that thing called the Boston Massacre in 1770. Now, John Adams, to show what kind of a man of courage he was, he took the job of defending those British soldiers, which was a very highly unpopular thing to do in Boston. But John Adams, as it turned out, was a man of principle, and he was acting on his principles. Scholars have asked what I have been thinking about on this whole issue, not just for this class, but if you have the power to deny facts, if you possess the power to deny facts, that's true power. Never mind, guns and insurrections and all that, that's power, that's true. But if you have the power to take a historical fact and just reinterpret it and then make it stick, that's real power. Let me put it to you like this. When I'm teaching about colonization in the modern European class, I ask my students all the time, do you think people in Mauritania and Mali, in Western Africa, did they start speaking French? No, they did not. Or Angola, did they speak Portuguese in Angola? No. Or Mozambique? No. Or in South Africa, were they speaking Afrikaans, the Dutch language? No, they're not. No, the Xhosa, the Bantu people, they weren't speaking those languages. So here's power. This is actually real power. When someone can come into your living room, come into your country, come into your living room, sit down on your furniture and say, what do you believe in? I believe in this. No, you don't. You believe what I believe from now on. What language do you speak? No, you don't. You speak my language from now on. And then they say, well, no, we're not going to do that. Do you go like, well, yeah, you are. And then you do? That's called real power. You made them give it their history, their culture, their language to adopt what you got. That's real power. Now you can do that at the point of a gun. Look, guns are guns and they'll always work. You can sit up there and cause people to give up what makes them, their language, their culture, and their history, before they even agree with you, okay, it never had any. Or my history didn't start until you got here. That's real power. That's real power. So the power to deny facts is in itself a statement of a kind of power which those who are interested in power and seizing power by any means, that's what we're fighting, I believe, which is in part what this is about. Take, for example, what happened here. Now, oftentimes I'll tell the students that it may be easier to understand the whole race thing if we look at it from a gender issue first, because there are men, there are women. Easy enough. The Senate Judiciary hearing, when Justice Thomas went up before the Judiciary Committee, I think when Joe Biden was the chair of that committee at the time, I was working at the aircraft company as the director of training for aircraft braking system, which used to be Goodyear Aerospace. And I remember when this thing captivated people in the company, and they had TVs in the hallways of people to watch this thing. It was truly one of the most unusual things I saw. Corporate America, at least our offices, came to a stop where people could look at this. Because word from corporate headquarters was, everybody must watch this. Like, okay. And then the vice president of operations came to me and said, I want you to put together a class on sexual harassment. I said, you mean to not do it, right? Which was really unusual, because that request, that directive coming from him, because he was the biggest violator of sexual harassment in the entire company. So I'm in human resources, I'm training, so I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. You can't listen, the only way you can get lower than me is to be a pregnant aunt. So I put together the class. Everybody went through mandatorily, except him. He never came to one class. But when the federal auditors came through, he could say, yes, they've all been through, right, Johnson? Yes, they've been through. And during those training sessions, some of the guys on the shop floor, some people from the offices went, oh, these are just women trying to take over, blah, blah, blah. Feminazis or exerting their power, so on and so forth. And that would go on and on and on, some of the sessions and so forth. And then when I would go like, well, what if it was your wife? Well, if it's my wife, I'll kill the SOB, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, so I get it. Let me get this straight. As long as someone else's wife or sister or daughter, you're okay with that. But if it's your wife, sister, or daughter, you want to do something violent. Yeah. Thanks for letting us know who you are. That it's for all these people over here, it's completely all right. But as long as it affects you, wonderful you, then it's a violation of cosmic order. Now, since then, we have understandably put a more focus, still not enough of a focus, on sexual harassment in the workspace. Rightfully so, because it was going on, not just a lot, but I mean, like in volumes, tidal wave volumes. To put together the class, I interviewed, given that we had a small HR department, there were what, 7 people, 3 guys, maybe 3 guys, or maybe 12 people. So 3 guys, 9 women. And I went and I talked to these women. I work with these women every day. We did Christmas parties. We did, birthday parties. We went out to lunch together as a department. I thought I knew them. They were like part of my family. So I started talking to them, asking, well, so what goes on? I mean, have you experienced some of this kind of stuff? And once they started talking, they said, not only have we experienced this kind of stuff, they began telling me other things that they've been experiencing. It left my jaw on the floor. And here's the point. I worked by these women every day, side by side. We worked on projects together. And yet, even though we worked side by side every day of the year, they lived on a completely different planet than I did. And I wondered, how is this possible that I can work with you every day and not see this and not know this? And they went, Fred, you're a man. Of course you're not going to see it. And I thought, wow, I had a blind spot, not because I wasn't looking, but just because, because it didn't happen to me. I didn't have to think about it. Guess what? I didn't. When they came to work every day, they had to think about it because I was always there. You follow what I'm saying? So if you take that example and pick it up and overlay it onto the issue of race, there are things happening in society that may not be happening to me, but it doesn't mean they're not happening. Just because I don't know doesn't mean they're not happening over here. And so, yeah, am I happy that it wasn't happening to me? Of course I was happy. But once I found out it was happening to my fellow coworkers, then it became up. Then I said, we had to do something about this because the level of their work is affecting mine. That's if you believe that we're all connected to each other in some kind of way. Now, if you don't believe that, if you believe in this whole atomized theory, fine, be your own satellite. But if you're working together, something had to be done. The ability to the power to create a different alternative set of facts, to write your own history, to just do a different alternative world, impose solutions that didn't happen, live in your own planet, live in your own reality. That is part of why I believe has led to the fracturing of our democracy and its weakening. And has produced other effects. There's some people are being held accountable for, and others not. It's brought us to the Happy Junction where we are right now, as a nation that many nations around the world, from what I can gather, are looking at us and wondering if we are still a reliable democracy. I mentioned to you all the last time that I think when we did the presentation on the Quad Alliance. Listen, I know that for a while, people were very squeamish about saying this because we don't want to get into American exceptionalism and, actually our nation's not any better than anybody else's nation. Okay, yeah, all nations and the people are valuable in them, but I'm sorry, America is a superpower, and especially maybe 10 years from now to be different. But right now, with democracies on the ropes and on the back foot, right now, when people around the world are looking for democracies to have hope in, America is still the standout democracy and the standard bearer. And people are taking their cues from us on either what we do or don't do. There are democracies that are smaller and weaker that will interrogate their own survival strategy and likelihood based on how ours survives or doesn't. And there are strong people around the world, dictators, who will be encouraged depending upon what does or doesn't happen here. They're watching a lot more than we're watching from the outside, inside out. Now, solutions. Well, I have only one actually, and it comes in the form of this lady right here, Dr. Mary Lefkowitz. Now I ask you, does Dr. Lefkowitz look like she's the leader of a revolutionary movement? Dr. Lefkowitz came to my attention because she's the author of a book entitled Not Out of Africa, How Afrocentrism Became an Excuse to Teach Myth as History. Now you see the big baseball cap with the X on it. So it came out right around the time when Spike Lee had made that movie called Malcolm X. Everybody's going around buying the big X hats. Just to show you how completely nerded out I am, I thought it was for X-Men. And I'm supposed to know this stuff. Now, Dr. Mary Lefkowitz, she tells in her book, Not Out of Africa, that the reason she wrote the book was because she went to an event on her campus. I don't know, I think it was Wellesley. I should have brought the book with me because it's in my office. But she went to an event on racism and race and Afrocentrism. And the person that she was who was speaking at her college that on that particular evening was this guy, Dr. Yosef Ben Yochanan. Now, it might also be helpful to know that Dr. Lefkowitz, she's an expert in Egyptology. So I mean, she can read hieroglyphics. Why anybody would want to know that? I don't know. But she can read hieroglyphics. She said she's an expert in ancient Egyptian civilization and that part of Mesopotamia. So Dr. Ben Yochanan came and apparently was saying that, Black people built the Library of Alexandria. And he did this and he did that, and Black folks did this and they did that. So Dr. Lefkowitz was sitting there listening to all this. And when he got through and the Q&A came and he started entertaining any questions, she said, excuse me, your fact about folk building the Library of Alexandria, that's not true. He went, well, how do you know? He went, well, I'm an Egyptologist. Uh-oh. And she told him that if in fact that the Library of Alexandria had been built when he said it had been built, it would have to have been built before Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great did not go through there until such and such a time. And so the library was not built until after that. So how could it have been built before that if Alexander the Great hadn't been there yet? So what did he do? Dr. Lefkowitz had her facts. He said, well, this is just another racist attack. You follow that? With no facts available, he deferred to that. Now, Dr. Lefkowitz, why am I talking about her? Dr. Lefkowitz did this. She said, as I was saying, and went right back to the same facts. She stuck to the facts. He had the rhetoric. She had the facts. She stuck to them. She stuck to the facts, showed them like this, and there were other people in the audience with her. She stuck to the facts. He got flustered, and she completely wore him down with a relentless sticking to the facts. Dr. Lefkowitz, in her book, Not Out of Africa, says that now she's an academic, a real academic. And she said that what she fears is going on in American education is that, at least in that instance, people were preferring indoctrination versus information. She's a teacher. She's not for indoctrination. So if we're going to fight this, wherever it is, facts. That's not just when it comes to the issue of CRT, but also other things like elections. Dr. Lefkowitz, in my estimation, is a superhero. And now, I'd like to close with a story. The story is The Preacher and the Crank. Just so you know, the preacher was me. A few years ago, a friend of mine, right when this stuff started really heating up about CRT and so on and so forth, a friend of mine asked me to teach a series of classes. Well, let me start here. Once upon a time, there was a preacher and a crank. And a friend of mine, fellow seminarian that had gone to Western with, now he had his church was pastoring in a not to be named part of Michigan. He said, Fred, would you do me a favor? Sure, you get a standing yes with me. It gets me in trouble a lot. He said, would you come and teach a class on the history of the Black church? He says, I think my parishioners need it. Well, all right, if you think so. So I did. Yes. So I got there and I went 4 Sundays in a row teaching about the history of the Black church. We had a great time. I had a great time. I hope they were too. And then came time for the Q&A. During the Q&A, I could see this happening the whole time. Every session, the crank was there. I could see him spoiling for a fight. It's like every session, his face got twisted more and more. I figured pretty soon it's going to twist so much, it's going to collapse on itself. Finally came for time for the Q&A. The crank was ready. First question was, what about abortion? I didn't talk about that at all. I talked about the history of the Black church, transatlantic slave trade, Bishop Allen, Absalom Jones. This word, abortion, did not come up one time. He went, so I talked about history of the Black church. Then he raised his hand again. What about gay marriage? I did not talk about gay marriage. I talked about the history of the Black church. Now, the Black church is wrestling with this, like a lot of churches and institutions are these days, but I did not talk about that. And the reason I didn't talk about it, because I'm not, this is not what I talk about. I don't know enough about this issue to speak on it to the point that the LGBT community does. So then he settled down. No one else was raising their hand. The crank raised his hand again. He says, whoa, I'm talking about this. Next question. What about all this transgender stuff? And I thought, for a third time, I'm talking about the Black church. And he wasn't going away. So finally I said to him, well, let's try this. Let's do this. How about you and I make an agreement? You go ahead and be concerned about abortion, gay marriage, and all that transgender stuff. You focus on that. And then what I'll focus on are things like, while you're doing that, I'm going to keep focusing on poverty, homelessness in America, hunger, and injustice. Because, we're not doing so well in those areas. So that's the thing that makes that's where you want to grind your axe. Feel free to grind your axe on that stone. I'm going to deal with poverty, homeless, and hunger in America. If you do that over there and fix that over there, and if I can do a little bit fixing this over here, that'll be called having a good day. Our society will get better. If you do your part, I do my part. But I don't need to adopt your angst about whatever it is over there. That is not my calling. That's not my focus. And I think that if by the time I die, we resolve any one of these other things, which we probably will not, that'll be called a good day. And as I got through that Q&A session, why did I decide to do that? Because I had another birthday. And as I'm looking around and my birthdays start to add up, I was thinking about this thing again, putting this class together. I have a grandson. I know I look too young and good looking to have a grandson. I agree with you. But I've been wondering as I put this class together, should I write Jeremiah and begin to explain to him what he's needed? Now that he's becoming a Black man in America, should I warn him about some of the things he just needs to think that he hasn't had to think about as a child? But he's not a child anymore. He's in his teenage years, which means the society's going to view him more as an adult. And they're not going to give him the kind of break that children get. Now, I talked to several people about this, and I said, I feel guilty about even thinking about doing this because if I give him my tainted, jaundiced view of the world, am I hamstringing him to not let him live out his youth? Or if I don't tell him, given what I know to still be the reality out there, is it called grandparenting malpractice? I decided to warn him. And let me close with this. I decided to warn him because I was at a board meeting for Habitat for Humanity, Kent County, about a year or two ago, and we were on this discussion of diversity and critical race theory coming up, and some of the fellow board members said, look, people can't know what they don't know. I don't hold that against people. If you don't know, you don't know. And I mentioned the fact that, for example, whenever I go into a store or a gas station, I always make sure I get a receipt. And some of them went, why? I said, for proof of purchase. Well, if you pay for it and you just put your card in there, what's the big deal? I said, because you don't get it. People still look at African Americans as being natural thieves. Now, not everybody does that, but I said, just in case somebody has that in their brain housing group, sorry, that's a Marine Corps phrase, and they accuse me of stealing something, I want the receipt. And the individual said, wow, he said, I never think about that. I said, that's the beauty of being you. and the fact that you never got to think about it, but I can't afford to not think about it. A number of years ago, teaching the slavery and race class, I told the students about similar to this thing about the receipts. Over on 16th Street, there used to be a 7-Eleven. I went in there one evening, dressed pretty much like this. I was teaching the seminar class. I had on a dress coat. It was like January, February. It's very cold. I just had a taste for a Diet Pepsi, which is really unusual because I don't like Diet Pepsi. But the guy working behind the counter, I mean, just to put a fine point on it, the guy, working behind the counter, he looks like he just, got run over by several dump trucks. And I walked in, he says to me, what you got in that coat, a gun? And I said, what? I said, man, okay, I'm not gonna tell you what I said to him. But I got on the phone the next day in my office and I called 7-Eleven headquarters. I told them what happened. I said, y'all better send somebody out here right now or else I'm going to the press with this. I said, you can believe me or not. I said, you can either come and deal with this. I said, I'm teaching a class called Slavery and Race in America. So come and talk, because see, my students who are predominantly white, they think I'm making this stuff up sometimes. So send one of your corporate representatives out here and tell them, because they need to know that this happens not just sometimes, but all the time. And you know what? To their credit, 7-Eleven sent someone out to talk to my class. Yes, we have sensitivity training. Yes, we do this. Yes, it's a problem. And whenever we have this kind of stuff going on in our company, we do X, Y, Z. The guy he was going great. I mean, his thing's just going so great. And then he said, and now to show you how serious 7-Eleven is, I have these coupons for Slurpees. He turned it into a sales event, started passing them around. Now, the worst part of the story, the saddest part of the story, was that as he got through, I said, hey, can I have one too? But I found that as time goes on, I have more birthdays. I decided, life is too short. So questions like I was getting from the crank, what about gay rights? What about abortion? Listen, if you have a legitimate question and want to really engage, sure, I can do that all day long. But if you just want to sit up there and have an argument, I don't have time for that. I don't have as many days left as I used to. I'm not wasting my time on that anymore. If you're serious and want to solve a problem, let's go ahead and get to work and work shoulder to shoulder. But if not, I don't care. It's like Malcolm X said, after he had his conversion and let the Nation of Islam go, and he said, I will work with anybody of any color who wants to solve injustice and make sure America can be fair. But if you're a Black person that believes in injustice, you are my opponent. So whoever you are, if you want to resolve the issues of hunger, poverty, homelessness, whatever's going on out there, let's get busy. Let's get to work. Thank you. Take your questions.
Anything in chat, David?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Professor Johnson, so I just want to try to sum up what you've said the last 2 weeks. And what I've gotten gleaned from it is that critical race theory is a theory that was a true theory. It was developed by Professor Bell that says racism is systemic in the United States. But I think your major point you're trying to make is that CRT is not being taught in elementary or secondary public schools in the United States. Instead, what's being called CRT is really a more honest teaching of American history, especially about race, so that presidents like Washington, Jefferson, and Wilson, and people like Robert E. Lee are not don't nearly come across as positively as when a lot of the people in the room in this cohort that I'm in, who grew up in the 50s and 60s. And that's really disturbing to people, I think, and it's threatening their view of the United States as being inherently good, about, everything about the United States is good. Is that a fair summation of at least some of what you've been saying?
Yes, I would add that I think that what's been also going on is that there's been a conflation of what is allegedly happening in the classroom, particularly K through 12.
Right,
Now, is the theory being taught in law schools or in the collegiate level?
right,
Yeah, it is, especially in law schools,
right,
but only as a theory. But something being shoved down the children's throat from K through 12, I've not found any evidence of that happening, but I'm gonna qualify that by saying I've not found any evidence of that happening. So what I think has been going on is that people, like the initial reports that Christopher Rufo was getting about training classes going on in companies and bias training and all that, implicit bias, that kind of thing was being done, and it was done in a way that was, and if in fact the reports from Seattle were true, where the white employees were being sent over here and employees of color were being sent over there, and the white employees were being given messages like, you're inherently racist, all that kind of stuff. Well, that of course is problematic. It doesn't solve anything for anybody.
right.
So that kind of thing was going, if that was going on, I think that's what he seized upon, and people took that and overlaid it onto the classroom. I've not found any evidence of where that's happening in the classroom, especially K through 12. And at the collegiate level, the only place where I found that CRT is being taught is at the legal level, because it is a theory, a law theory,
Right.
being taught in law schools where schools are teaching it that are law schools, and not all of them are teaching it.
Right. And
it's interesting you mentioned Woodrow Wilson, because not many, people remember Woodrow Wilson as being the guy that took America to World War I, the war, what they call it, the world to make he called it the war to make the world safe for democracy. Okay. But Woodrow Wilson also has one of the worst track records on race relations and racial policy of any president of the 20th century, certainly in the first half of the 20th century. He was the president during the Palmer raids of 1919. I'm sorry, I think he was alive during the Palmer raids, which were a Red Scare after World War I. He was there. He was still president during the 1919 Chicago race riot. He was, several things happened with Woodrow Wilson's presidency that just, oh yes, he was the president when Birth of a Nation came out, and they showed it at the White House, and he said it was like history being written with lightning. So yeah, he is a guy that I would not hold him up as the poster child for reconciliation when it came to race relations in America. And Robert E. Lee, it goes with, who was it? What's his name? Douglas Southall Freeman wrote a 4-volume set called Lee's Lieutenants, which cast Lee as something of a mythic figure. If you're interested, Thomas L. Connolly wrote a book. Now, Dr. Connolly's not with us anymore, but he wrote a book entitled Lee the Marble Man, which is essentially takes a very hard look at Lee and says, look, okay, general, but not the mythological figure that the South turned him into, not a demigod. So yes, I think your summation is very accurate.
I guess, could I just ask one follow-up question? And that is, in terms of CRT as this theory that says racism is systemic in the United States, and it's such a problem that individual people, it's well beyond individual prejudice people. What do you think about the theory itself? Because that's a little bit different than some of us, have thought. I think that, we're improving as a country, at least I still feel that way, despite Trump and Trumpism from when we were kids. But, could you just give us your thoughts a little more on that part of it?
Well, that's why I like to look at things not so much from a theoretical point of view, but from an historical point of view, because historical fact says we are improving, that we have improved from a country. Let me do it this way. I have friends back in the DC area where I grew up, and I heard sometimes they have said things, oh, this is just like slave. This, it feels like this is going back to slavery. I'm like, yeah, that's not true.
Right.
Okay. So on the one hand, when you see people marching in Charlottesville, Virginia, 2017, talking about Jews shall not replace us, that's not true. And this is just like slavery, that's not true either. So I become very much wedded, even more so wedded than I was, and I was pretty wedded to the facts to begin with. So not anything theoretical, but to the facts of the matter, America has been a work in progress. We are not who we used to be in 1955, but we're still not who we need to be in 2022. So there, we are better, not as good as we need to be. Are there elements out there that are still going around this stuff? No, I cannot forget 2017. No, I cannot forget the fact that, and look, and the mere fact that Kanye West is a black man, he's an anti-Semite, period. I mean, I also mad at him the other day. I joined the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Okay, because I said, look, we need to have all hands on deck on this thing against anti-Semitism, we either fight it together or we don't fight it, because it's not going away. I've used the example sometimes in my class, the modern European class. Adolf Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism. He was like a guy walking around with a lamp with a cord, looking for just a plug. He stuck it into the wall. The current of anti-Semitism was already there. All he did was plug into it and the light bulb came on. So it was there and flowing fast in Germany. All he did was take it and exploit it and turned it into something uglier than it was, and it was already pretty ugly. Now, so I don't give somebody who's full of hate. I think the best poster I've seen on this is that it's not white versus black, it's racist against everybody else.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank.
This week I saw something on one of the news programs that just floored me. They said that and showed examples of Republican ads of Black people, and they changed the colors on their faces to make them look darker.
Yeah.
It so upset me that I couldn't sleep that night.
Mhm.
I'd like to think, I don't know. We're racists are finding new ways to do things that just perpetuate what's been going on for a long time. It's just sad. That's all I can say about it. Now, I don't know if the Democrats lightened the faces of Black people, but they didn't say that. But
Well,
you know,
if they did that, there would be the problem in reverse, wouldn't it?
yes.
Because you know what, that would even be worse. Like, I'm not really a criminal. Look, I'm lighter. Okay, gee, thanks. When my mother told me when she was growing up in Alabama, there was this saying: if you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're Black, get back. And so colorism, as they call it, colorism is still a problem, or is a problem in the Black community. When I was growing up, you see other stuff, stuff like, oh, you got good hair. Well, what's that? And usually it meant like, it's not really curly, not kinky, or whatever that meant. And so there's all these fissures and shadows about that. And it goes back to what the 88 race, the 88 presidential race, when Dukakis was running against Bush 1 and the Willie Horton ad came out. Willie Horton, the revolving door crime and so on and so forth. And Willie Horton was a criminal that got out on early release or a weekend parole or something like that. Then he committed a crime. And if you like this guy, that's what he'll do. Well, the fact that Willie Horton was a Black guy, and that plus crime, plus what I call the Ghostbuster Syndrome, people that were prepared to hear that anyway. Look, this is where all this sort of implicit bias, and I include myself in this. I tell my students all the time that when I walk across campus at night, I walk across campus at night in a different kind of way than my female students do. There are things, that's not that things can't happen to me, but I'm not worried about the way that they have to go certain ways, make sure they stay in lighted areas. I don't worry about that stuff. Now, I do think about it, but I don't worry about it the same way my female colleagues and students do, because why? I'm a male. It does not mean it can't happen to me. It's just that I live in a different reality and they got to take extra special precautions. If you take, again, that based on gender and then translate that, overlay it onto some things you might have to do differently because of race, well, then that's the world we live in. And what we're trying to get to we're trying to get to a situation where my female students and colleagues can walk across campus any time of day or night with the same confidence that I do all the time. That's when we'll be where we need to be. Peg.
I just want to commend you for the first half of your presentation, and prior to that, I've been thinking, why isn't it critical race history? Because the race is history. The race is critical information that we need. Why do we call it a theory? And thank you for at least alluding to that, if I heard you to say what I think you did.
I think you did.
There is another class going on with HASP right now called the Racial Wealth Gap. And the first session was yesterday, and the second session is a week from yesterday. And it's really, the first class went through all of the federal regulations and assorted laws and legislation that consciously or unconsciously disadvantaged minorities. And it's amazing, the list of regulations that have been in the 20th century that have been implemented that are the foundation of institutionalized racism. And I would recommend anybody that attended this class to at least go to the second session of the racial wealth gap.
What is that being taught again?
Pardon me?
What is that being taught?
Here, it's a HASP class right now.
When is the next session?
Yeah, next.
Next Tuesday? I'm gonna show up with one message. Where's mine? Okay. So let me respond to what you said, Peg. I told my students the other day that we were covering some of the stuff that before CRT was just called history. And I said to them, I said, you know what? There are people out there who are waving this bloody CRT flag. They say that you're too fragile. You can't take it. That you're not strong enough to take the facts, that you're not strong enough to know the truth. I said, are y'all strong? Let me tell you, all the students in my Civil War class and in my US history class, they're offended that people think they're not strong enough. Now, again, I've often said that they don't know what I know when it comes to history, but they know when people are lying to them. And they want the truth. They're kind of fed up with all this, what people think, wanting to protect them from the truth. And of course, like I said, if your agenda is to set up and make people feel bad for what happened in 1819 or in 1820 during the Missouri Compromise, that clearly is a problem. But if you are simply disseminating and distributing the facts to make America a stronger democracy, we do not get stronger through ignorance. I don't know of a single instance where anybody got stronger by not being aware of something. For example, when it came to this wealth gap, do you realize from 1939 to 1945, the American economy didn't just change a little bit, it changed all the way. How Americans made cars in 1939 before World War II, everything. Manufacturing, assembly line production, tool and die makers, cutting tools, everything, because we became the arsenal of democracy, particularly Michigan, being the arsenal of democracy. Manufacturing had to change, so therefore engineering had to change, which means that the soldiers coming home from the Pacific and European theater in 1945, while they had been away, the economy had flipped several times. When you came back to participate in the new post-war economy, you need to have an education. The GI Bill was the footstool that allowed people to get that education, to participate in that new economy for the latter half of the 20th century, the space age. Now, Southern senators intentionally cut Black people out of that, the GI Bill, so if they can't get a job in that new economy, they're not qualified to work and make the money that will also help them buy a house and start building family income and wealth. And you see how it begins to snowball and gather momentum. So yes, it was intentional, sometimes accidental, but things like redlining, those kind of things, that's not accidental. Those are, and they may not even be policy structured, but they're definitely intentional. Yes.
Questions from virtual has.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Fred, can you further explain Christopher Rufo's role in demonizing CRT and creating the overblown reaction that we see him presenting today?
From what I've been able to gather, Ian, he relishes in the role of, from what I've been able to gather, the people who are on this train, they love for people to say, you're just trying to inflame people. Like, yes, they love to be attacked. They love to be martyrs. They love to be aggrieved. They love to be attacked. They love to be, in fact, you call them a racist, they'll see, that just proves what I'm saying. So they're in a constant state of martyrdom and victimization. And the more you attack them, for them, that's more fundraising opportunities. So they love the friction, they love the fuming and the frothing. So for them, the turn of the dial on the division is a good thing. So as a merchant of division, yeah. Under the guise of I'm just trying to get some different viewpoints out there. Now, look, I went to Grand Haven. I went to the Grand Haven Library. Again, I don't know why do I do these things. I went to the Grand Haven Public, there was a public hearing on this. And I said, well, all right. mean, honestly, the reason I do it is because we sat there, we had an open discussion for an hour and a half, close to 2 hours with the public on this. There was no histrionics. I presented pretty much what I presented to you all. I don't know if everybody agreed with what I'm saying, but there wasn't these explosions like you've seen around the country at these school board meetings. So it is possible to have a civil discussion on this stuff. And I might add that it would help if more institutions and venues had hope civic virtues of discourse guiding them as the structure by which they engage. But on that one occasion, it was a pretty civil discussion of engagement but I think with Christopher Rufo, and I haven't met the guy, I've seen him interviewed on TV, but he loves when you come at him like that, when you turn the dial up on him, trying to get him to admit what you're just doing just to divide people, that serves their purposes. I'm doing my best to not fall into that trap and sticking to the facts. Yes.
We're speaking about facts, but there's so many people that are believing false facts. There's a twist to things right now where they're adjusting their logic into making facts that don't really fall into that realm.
This is the great danger. How many of you all saw the movie The Help? Okay, if you didn't see The Help, I recommend looking at it. The Help. There's a scene in the movie of The Help where the wonderful Viola Davis. And by the way, if you have not seen the Woman King, if you have not seen the Woman King, you should run to the theater and see the Woman King. But there's a scene in the movie The Help where Viola Davis playing one of the maids or the domestic help in the South, 1950s, 1960s. She overhears the woman she's working for talking about her having a separate bathroom. And she says, well, you know, they have these diseases and so forth. Well, okay, that's fiction, that's Hollywood. And as I always tell my students, Hollywood's first obligation is to entertain you and educate you maybe. In this instance, Hollywood's entertaining you and educating you at the same time. And here's the rub of it all, the crux of it all. People had those beliefs, and they have those beliefs now. They may be false. The problem that I have with it, and here's the danger, it doesn't matter if they're false or not, they believe it and act on it. There's the danger. So you can call them crazy. So that's what I'm talking about also, Ian. You can call them, if you call them crazy, they get crazier. Call them extreme, so what? It's not what they so much they believe, but the fact that I can't, every time I hear somebody talking about, well, I can't believe so-and-so's done that. Why can't you believe it? At this point, I wonder, why can't you believe it? After everything we've seen, why can you not believe this? Because every time you need a little bit more to prove that to you, frankly, I feel personally endangered by that. You haven't seen enough already. It goes back to what I said earlier, or what Herman Wouk wrote in the second of his series, or second book, The Winds of War, then War and Remembrance. There's one part of that book where he is a German general who's talking to another German about wondering that, and they were both wondering, why didn't the Jews leave when they had a point? The German general, he coins this phrase called the will to not believe. They saw Adolf Hitler come to power in 1933. They heard the rhetoric. They were there during the signing of the Nuremberg laws in 1935 when they were literally written out of their citizenship. So it wasn't like it was getting bad. They were there during Kristallnacht in 1938, when Jewish synagogues were bombed and burned and looted in homes and so forth. So it wasn't like things were getting better. They were getting progressively worse. And yet still, they chose to believe that at some point it would stop and things would settle down. Why? Because throughout European history, there had always been pogroms and there had been anti-Semitism, and people said what they had to say to get elected, and then they would die down. Once they got in office, they die down and go away, and that's what would happen. No, it won't. And why would you wait for that anyway? So people having the will to not believe that it can be as bad as it's going to get is a dangerous situation. Now, do you overcorrect for that? Tell people what to believe? No, you don't. So we got to find a way. We have to find a way of preserving this democracy and allowing people to believe what they believe, even if I think it's kooky, but to not understanding that there is a clear and present danger out there amongst us. And if we don't recognize that fact, we are dooming ourselves and not a risky future, at least one that is definitely more perilous than it needs to be. When I ran for office, no one likes to lose in a political, because if you're running the race the right way, you put your heart, your soul, and your mind into it, and on election night, you think you're going to get the result that you want. It didn't happen. But I'll tell you one thing. When I called Pete Hoekstra the first time and then Bill Huizenga the second time, I didn't like losing. I don't like to lose anything. But I tell you what I did feel good about, the fact that even though people kept telling me for 2 years or 2 or 3 years, it's an uphill climb, blah, 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 and, it's never happened out here in this district, I felt good that I had helped to strengthen, I thought I helped to strengthen American democracy by participating in this system. So it's a contact sport, full contact sport. It's ugly. It can be taxing. It's not for the weak-hearted or the people that got thin skins. You have to want it badly and put in the work. But it's called American democracy. That's the system that we have, and it will work, but it's not going to work by itself. It's not going to work from afar. It's not going to work remotely. And so if it's in trouble, that means that we have to get involved and do more than hit the like button on Facebook. That's called selectivism, not activism. Thank you very much. Did you all hear that just now? I sound like Elvis Presley. Thank you very much.